This is number 5 of our Saturday at Noon talks, and it's called Hildegard of Bingen Through Both Ends of the Telescope, an overview of her life and beliefs, and then a bit of detail about her musical style. I'm not assuming that you know anything about medieval history, medieval philosophy, medieval theology, or medieval music. I just ask you to keep an open mind. Hildegard is such a fascinating person. The breadth of her life and work, and the fact that so much of it has come down to us, enables us to ask all sorts of questions. But as with most historical figures, we must remember these two popular dicta. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there, from L.P. Hartley's The Go-Between of 1953. And history is what we don't throw away, an Oxford Tudor historian. It's so easy to create a mental picture from secondary sources. For example, Hildegard on the Environment, or Hildegard on Gender Studies, written by an enthusiast keen to enlist the aid of such a beguiling figure, possibly not so hot on 12th century theology. But we do need a theological context as well as a musical one if we're to understand her music properly. I suppose my first experience was the same as yours, the Gothic Voices recording A Feather on the Breath of God, now some 35 years old. Some people have spent their entire lives working on Hildegard. We could certainly organise a week-long conference without any difficulty. But today we've only got a short time for an overview. We'll look briefly at the key dates of her life, where she lived, what she wrote, the things for which she is best known, the visions and her music, and then we'll have a more detailed look at Sivius and her spectacular chant, O Vos Angeli. Here's a well-known Hildegard quotation seen in many programme notes. In the 3rd year of my life I saw so great a brightness that my soul trembled. I kept seeing this way until my 40th year, when I was forced by such pressure of pains to write about the visions I had seen and heard. I brought forth songs with their melody in praise of God and the saints, without being taught by anyone. I sang them too, even though I had never learnt musical notation nor any kind of singing. That comes from the Vita Sancta Hildegardis, the biography of Hildegard written between 1174 and 1190, that is 5 years before her death to 10 years afterwards. But was she the first woman composer? Have a listen to this. That was composed by an abbess of noble birth. Not Hildegard, but someone who lived a whole 300 years earlier, Cassia of Constantinople. It was sung there by Capella Romana, directed by Alexander Lingus. At the top we see the Byzantine notation, and underneath a modern transcription. Now we'll listen to another Kyrie.
Christ
Well, that sounds quite modern by comparison. It was 2 sections of a 9-fold Kyrie, and this time it was by Hildegard, and it's probably her simplest chant. On the left we see the original Hufnagel, horseshoe nail notation, with my modern transcription on the right. It was sung there by the Oxford Girls' Choir. To put Hildegard into historical context, let's create a timeline which starts a couple of decades before her birth. The early years of her life were overshadowed by the investiture crisis, the power struggle between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor. This lasted 45 years, from 1076 to 1121, when it was resolved at the Diet of Worms. 2 important figures from this time, Peter Abelard, born in 1079, and Bernard of Clairvaux, born in 1090, represent 2 conflicting wings of Catholic belief. Peter Abelard was a scholastic theologian of the mind, and Bernard of Clairvaux was a monastic theologian of the heart, a debate which still runs in the Catholic Church to this day. In this illustration we see Pope Urban II addressing the Council of Clermont in 1095, 3 years before Hildegard's birth. It was this event that kicked off the First Crusade. The painting dates from the 1470s. Hildegard was born in 1098 into minor nobility. Her parents were Hildebert of Bermersheim and Mechthild. Here's the church where she was baptised, on the northern edge of Bermersheim. The following year, 1099, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, and here we see armoured knights scaling the walls in this painting from the 14th century. This is a bas-relief from the Hildegard altar at the chapel of St. Roch, Bingen. It shows an 8-year-old Hildegard in the centre, being presented by her parents on the left, to Countess Jutta von Sponheim, who was leader of the community of nuns at Disimbonenberg. Hildegard took her vows at the age of 14 in the year 1112, receiving the veil from the Bishop of Bamberg. In that same year, Jutta became an anchorite and lived in an enclosure attached to the new Benedictine monastery, and Hildegard moved with her. They lived in this way for 24 years until Jutta's death in 1136. It's likely that she taught Hildegard to read and to chant the psalms and even to play the psaltery, though Hildegard later denied that she'd had any musical education whatsoever. Here are the ruins of Disimbonenberg Abbey today. At the age of 38, Hildegard became magistral, or acting abbess, on the death of Jutta, and 4 years later she began her great musical work, the Symphonia. The following year she started her visionary project, Civius, assisted by the monk Volmar and her protégé Ricardus von Stade, who was a relative of Jutta. In this miniature painting of about 1230, we see from left to right Volmar taking dictation from Hildegard, who is writing on a wax tablet, divinely inspired, and behind her stands Ricardus. Hildegard declares that these are true visions flowing from God. And behold, in the 43rd year of my life, while gazing at a heavenly vision with much fear and trembling, I saw a great splendour from which a voice called me from heaven. O fragile human, dust of dust, filth of filth, say and write what you hear and see. But as you are fearful in speaking, simple in explaining, and ignorant in writing, say and speak not according to a human mouth, nor according to the mind of human invention, nor according to the conventions of human writing, but according to that which you see and hear among the wonders of God in high heaven. With all the interest in Hildegard's music and visionary writings, it's easy to overlook another important part of her output, dating from 1146 onwards, and this is the correspondence with important church and political figures, such as the Emperor and Bernard of Clairvaux. After 40 years or so at Disimbonenberg, she decided to relocate to Rupertsberg with her 20 noble nuns. This was not a popular move with the monks, who were doubtless used to having the women's help about the community. Here we see an engraving of the Rupertsberg convent dating from about 1620. It was destroyed a few years later after the 30 Years' War. In the 1150s, we see more aspects of her work, which we'll look at later. After the completion of Civius, her friend and assistant Ricardus became abbess of Bassum, much to Hildegard's distress. She died the following year. Hildegard also had a great interest in natural philosophy and medicine. Her Physica Causae et Curae gives a good sense of 12th century herbalism, based on humours, folklore and common superstition, with a good dose of mysticism thrown in. Her friend Bernard of Clairvaux attempted to restore the authentic rule of St. Benedict by helping to establish the more ascetic Cistercian order. He died in 1153 and was canonised 21 years later. It's easy to see why he and Peter Abelard have very different views. In 1155, Frederick Barbarossa was crowned emperor, but Hildegard was not afraid to criticise him for supporting 3 anti-popes in opposition to Pope Alexander III. Although she had been ill, at the age of 60, Hildegard undertook the first of her 4 preaching tours. We'll talk about those later when we look at the map. In the 1160s, Hildegard is consolidating her work, her reputation and her legacy. Here is a picture of the original Eibingen Abbey and the modern buildings on the same site, which date from 1904. Hildegard courted controversy in 1169 when she took the possessed woman Siegewieser into the convent. Siegewieser had been a disturbed and rather wild preacher, apparently given to parodying Hildegard herself. I suspect that she suffered from something like Tourette's syndrome. The following year, Hildegard undertook her last preaching tour, and in 1173 her faithful secretary Volmar died and was succeeded by Gottfried, who compiled the biography Vita Sancti Hildegardis, which provides us with a lot of information about her life. There was more trouble in 1178, when the nuns were accused of burying an excommunicant in sacred ground. As punishment, they were banned from singing and from taking communion. The following year, Hildegard died, aged 81, on the 17th of September 1179. Moves to canonise her were started in 1227, but it was only in our own day, in 2012, that Pope Benedict XVI declared her to be a Doctor of the Church. Let's look now at the area of southwest Germany where Hildegard lived and worked. In the centre of the map, in red, we see where Hildegard was born, in Bermersheim. She became a novice in Dizzy-Bodenberg, where she remained until she started her own community at Rupertsberg, and later a secondary community across the river in Eibingen. In green, we have her first preaching tour going east from Mainz to Bamberg. In pink, the second preaching tour to the west from Trier to Metz. In blue, the third tour to the north, as far as Cologne, and in brown, the final tour, some years later, to the south as far as Zweifelten. This whole area is about 450 kilometres squared. Hildegard's written legacy is vast. Remember that she said it was in her 40th year, 1138, that she became a channel for divine inspiration. First we have the musical works, the Symphonia, and her book of visions, Civius, Know the Ways of the Lord. Then her scientific writings, and from 1146 onwards we get correspondence, lots of letters to popes, bishops and secular leaders. In 1150 we have her unknown language and letters, the Lingua Ignota, and the morality play, Ordo Virtutum, a sort of mini-opera written for the nuns when they moved to Rupertsberg. Then 2 more visionary works, the Liber Vitae Meritorum, Book of Life's Merits, and the Liber Divinorum Operum, the Book of Divine Works, as well as the biographies of the 2 local saints, St. Disibod and St. Rupert. Finally, 40 years after her death, the Pentachronon, or Mirror of Future Times, which was compiled by the Cistercian monk Gebeno. This is based on Sivius and is an anthology of her apocalyptic theology. Even if we were to organise a week-long conference with a day spent on each of these topics, the visionary writings, the music, the science, the letters, and the biographies, at the end of it I feel we'd still be strangely dissatisfied. And the reason I think is that scholars tend to work in these separate areas and they dig deep and narrow holes, and there's not a great deal of communication between them. We mustn't overlook the fact that she was a polymath with her own vision of the world and of the place of God in the world, so to her these subjects were all closely related. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Before we dismiss Hildegard as a superstitious relic of a bygone age, we should perhaps ask ourselves why it was that she communicated both with the rationalist Peter Abelard and the devout Bernard of Clairvaux. The most challenging subject in Hildegard for modern people is probably Sivius, the visions. This consists of 26 illustrated visions divided into 3 books. To take us into the mind and soul of Hildegard, we'll have a quick look at a few of them. When I was 42 years and 7 months old, heaven was opened, and a fiery light of exceeding brilliance came and permeated my whole brain, and inflamed my whole heart and my whole breast, not like a burning but like a warming flame, as the sun warms anything its rays touch. Sivius stands for CVS Domini, Know the Ways of the Lord. In Book 1, The Creator and Creation, there are 6 visions. In Book 2, The Redeemer and Redemption, 7 visions. And in the last book, The Virtues and History of Salvation, there are 13 visions. The frontispiece of Book 1 is another picture of Hildegard writing on a wax tablet, dictating to Volmar, again with the heavenly fire of inspiration coming from above. But this time, Ricardus is not in the picture. The first vision shows God, the light giver, and humanity. Here Hildegard sees the Lord of the universe enthroned on an iron mountain, with groups of 2 people looking out of windows on each of the peaks. The 2 virtues at the bottom are the fear of the Lord and poverty of spirit. In Vision 2 we see the fall, with Lucifer and his angels falling as stars from the top of the picture, foreshadowing the subsequent fall of Adam and Eve below. But it ends on a note of comfort, however. Although Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise, the sinless Redeemer delivered them by means of chastity, humility, charity, and other virtues. Vision 3 portrays God, the cosmos, and humanity as a cosmic egg, in which the universe is a layered structure where God maintains competing forces in balance. Looking inwards from the outside, Hildegard sees bands of bright and shadowy fire representing divine purification and judgment, pure air which signifies faith, a layer of water for baptism, and finally the globe made up of 4 elements. In Vision 4, Humanity and Life, on the left we see the infusion of the soul into the embryo within the mother's womb. Conception and pregnancy are described in terms of the ancient folk tale of milk curdling into cheese. The ancestors of the child are bringing bowls of cheese as gifts, into which the devil, the top of the left-hand group, introduces corruption. In the right-hand image we see the 4 last things, death and judgment, heaven and hell. On the left there are angels, and on the right demons. They are battling to steal the soul as it leaves the dying person's mouth. In Vision 5, the synagogue, the Jews are personified as the woman synagoga, blinded because of her unbelief. She is supplanted in God's favour by her Christian equivalent, ecclesia. Eventually the Jews will be converted and will return to the way of salvation. This view derives from Book 2 of Romans and was expounded by Bernard of Clairvaux, among others. Anti-Semitism in Germany got worse at the time of the First Crusade. In the final vision of Book 1, the Choir of Angels, we see an image of choirs as armies arrayed like a crown. This mandala-like pattern of 9 concentric circles shows, reading from the outside in, the angels, archangels, virtues, powers, principalities, dominations, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim, normally considered to be 3 groups of 3, but in Hildegard's mind it was probably 2 plus 5 plus 2, the 5 representing the 5 senses. The void in the centre represents the ineffable presence of God. And now we come to the music. Underneath all the texts, all the sacred psalms and canticles, these watery varieties of sounds and silences, terrifying, mysterious, whirling, and sometimes gestating and gentle, must somehow be felt in the pulse, ebb, and flow of the music that sings in me. My new song must float like a feather on the breath of God. Hildegard wrote a large collection of music for the liturgy, which she called the Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations. It survives in 2 sources, the Vendome manuscript with 58 pieces, and the Reason Codex with 77. 56 pieces are common to both. When the community moved to Rupertsberg in 1151, she wrote something very different, the Play of Virtues, a sort of mini-opera in which the nuns have their own quite characterised parts. It's possible that the spoken part of the Devil was played by Volmar. The 3 main groups of pieces in the Symphonia are the Songs to the Blessed Virgin, the Songs to the Celestial Hierarchy, which includes the angels, the local saints Higginbottom, Rupert, the apostles, and so on, and finally the Songs to St. Ursula and the 11,000 Virgins, a local cult. One of this last group, with the title Item de Virginibus, for the Virgins, is the beautiful responsory O Nobilissima Viriditas, which is on Hildegard's favourite subject of greenness, lushness or fecundity. It's in the hypermixolydian mode, or C major to us. O most noble greenness, rooted in the sun, and in a clear serenity, you shine within a wheel which no worldly excellence can comprehend. You are wrapped in the embrace of divine ministry. You blush like the dawn and burn like the flames of the sun. It's sung here by Penelope Martin-Smith, accompanied on an instrument which Hildegard herself may have played, the psaltery. Let's now examine the building blocks of Hildegard's musical style. Earlier we looked at the image from the Liber Divinorum Operum of Hildegard receiving a fiery stream of divine inspiration from above. She's waiting to record her vision on a wax tablet, similar to our modern notebook perhaps, with Volmar making a fair copy on parchment and Ricardus standing nearby. She described this process as sight. Perhaps the first question to ask when we try to analyse and understand her musical style is whether the words or the music came first. In classical songwriting, a composer usually starts with the words, studies them in depth for their meaning and metrical structure before creating a melody. But in modern pop music, it's usual for a singer to conceive the words and music simultaneously. So perhaps we should take literally the statement in Vita Sancti Hildegardis that she brought forth songs with their melody. Of the 18 pieces addressed to the celestial hierarchy, 2 have the heading De Angelis, to the angels, and as a case study we'll look at the most spectacular one, O Vos Angeli, which seems to relate to the final vision of Sivius, Book 1, the choirs of angels, which we studied earlier. O you angels who guard the peoples, whose form gleams in your face, and O you archangels who receive the souls of the just, and you virtues, powers, princedoms, dominations and thrones, who are counted in the secret number 5. And O you cherubim and seraphim, seal of the secrets of God, praise be to you who behold in the fountain the place of the ancient heart. For you see the inner strength of the Father, which breathed from his heart like a face. Praise be to you who behold in the fountain the place of the ancient heart. Here's the original notation in the Reason Codex, a lot of notes. The first thing to notice about this notation is that it's very efficient in terms of how much music will fit onto a page, even with Hildegard's very florid melismatic style. Here's the start of the piece. My modern edition on the right takes up about twice as much space. This table shows the 19 different symbols or neumes, that is single or compound notes, which we find in Hildegard. Most of them are used in this piece. In the left-hand column we have the Latin names, then the traditional square notation of standard plainsong, and then most importantly in the third column, the German horseshoe nail or Hufnagel notation, which is what we find in this manuscript and in Dendermonde. In the last column we have my modern transcription of them. Rhythmic interpretation in Hildegard is a contentious subject outside the scope of this talk. This music predates the concept of rhythmic modes with their metrical groupings of long and short notes. But as early as the 4th century, St. Augustine referred to 2 units of measurement, a long and a breve, the latter of which was half the length of the first. In our interpretation, we treat the punctum, that's the second symbol on our table, which is found in falling phrases, as shorter and lighter than the basic virga. Major and minor keys, as we understand them, are modern concepts. For most of history, we've had a system of modes to provide our tonal framework. If you look at the table, I'll now play these modes to you, and the important notes, the final and the dominant, which have the same role in music as the tonic and dominant in modern music, although the dominant is not always the 5th. Notice that the hypermodes, 2, 4, and 6, and 8, are a 4th below the modes 1, 3, 5, and 7. Mode 1 starts on D. Final is D. Dominant is A. Mode 2, the Hyperdorian mode, starts on A. Final again is D. Dominant, though, is F. Mode 3, the Phrygian mode, starts on E. Final is E, dominant a sixth above, C. Mode 4, the Hyperphrygian mode, which is the mode used in O Vos Angeli, the piece we're studying. The final is E, the dominant is A. Mode 5, the Lydian mode. Final is F, dominant is C. The Hyperlydian mode, which starts on C. The equivalent to our major scale. The final is F, the dominant is A. Mode 7, the Mixolydian mode. Final is G, dominant is D. And the Hypermixolydian mode, mode 8. The final is G, the dominant is C. So the observant among you would see that the notes of mode 1 and mode 8 are the same. The difference is the final and dominant notes. Modal theory, as we've just examined it, has its roots back in ancient Greece. But when it comes to combining notes together to form melodies, we need some other concepts such as the tetrachord, a group of 4 notes arranged tone, tone, semitone, or the hexachord, a group of 6 notes arranged tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. In other words, the first 4 notes of a major scale and the first 6 notes of a major scale. Hexachords take us right from the bottom of the bass stave, from bottom G, up to E at the top of the treble stave, a range of nearly 3 octaves. We're now going to look at these by overlapping them. So the G hexachord is called the Durham hexachord, the hard hexachord. The C hexachord is called the naturale hexachord, the natural hexachord. And the F hexachord is called the molle hexachord, the soft hexachord. And by overlapping these, we produce this. Durham, naturale, molle, Durham, naturale, molle, Durham. Much of our understanding of music comes from the study of cadences. In Hildegard's case, the last 3 or 4 notes of a phrase. And that phrase is followed by 5 more, all based around the final E, or the dominant A, for the opening line of text. But how are these building blocks put together to make a whole piece, a piece that sounds so natural, dynamic and rhapsodic? The term used for a melody built from a patchwork of pre-existing ideas and formulas is syntonization, a concept found in other cultures, such as the raga of Indian music or the maqam of Arabic music. In Hildegard, a rising figure will often occur near the start of a phrase, perhaps coinciding with a new syllable. Melodic leaps invariably follow the shape of the line. Intervals are progressively modified, and the phrases may increase in length with the intensity of the text. While the general direction of a line may rise or fall, within this there are more subtle twists of direction. As the music is propelled forward, the lines frequently cut across a phrase. Listen now to the final section of O Vos Angeli. The opening melodic idea is marked here by brackets, which often overlap and interlock. We'll end by listening to the whole of O Vos Angeli, sung by members of Symphony and Oxford Girls' Choir.